The boot came down hard on her fingers, crushing them against the cold concrete during morning formation. Lieutenant Garrett didn't even look down as he stepped over her, dismissing her like she was nothing more than an obstacle in his path. Irene Hill stayed silent, her hands throbbing, her dignity shattered in front of 200 soldiers who pretended not to see. They'd made it clear for 18 months that she didn't belong here, that her presence was a mistake, that someone like her would never matter in their world. But what none of them knew, what they couldn't possibly imagine, was that in 72 hours, Irene would speak 2 words that would turn their entire world upside down. 2 words that would make generals stand at attention and hardened soldiers freeze in their tracks. 2 words that would prove that the woman they'd dismissed, humiliated, and broken was actually the most dangerous person on that base. Before we continue, let us know where you're watching from. If you're enjoying this, don't miss out. Subscribe now for more. The morning sun cast long shadows across the parade ground at Forward Operating Base Sentinel, a joint European military installation nestled in the rugged terrain along the Norwegian border. It was the kind of crisp, clear morning that made everything seem sharper, more defined. The kind of morning where nothing could hide. Irene Hill stood in formation with the rest of Delta Company, her slight frame nearly invisible among the rows of soldiers. At 23, she was one of the youngest intelligence analysts assigned to Sentinel, and certainly the only one who'd been recruited directly from civilian life with barely 6 months of basic training. Her background was unconventional: a master's degree in cryptography from Cambridge, fluency in 7 languages, and a mind that could crack codes that had stumped military intelligence for years. But none of that mattered here. Not during formation. Not when Lieutenant Garrett conducted his morning inspections. Analyst Hill, Garrett's voice cut through the morning air like a blade. He'd stopped directly in front of her, his 6'4" frame casting her completely in shadow. "Your uniform is substandard." Again, Irene kept her eyes forward, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Sir? My uniform meets regulation standards, sir." "Are you contradicting me, Hill?" Garrett stepped closer, his boots now inches from where she stood at attention. "No, sir. Simply stating that I've followed. Drop and give me 50. Now." Irene didn't hesitate. She'd learned months ago that hesitation only made things worse. She dropped to the ground, her palms flat against the concrete parade ground. The surface was cold, gritty, still damp from the morning dew. Around her, she could feel the discomfort of her fellow soldiers. But no one spoke up. No one ever did. She began counting off push-ups, her arms steady despite the exhaustion that had become her constant companion. 15 months at Sentinel had taught her many things, but the most important lesson was this: endurance. Just endure. At push-up number 37, it happened. Lieutenant Garrett stepped forward to address the formation, to make some point about discipline and standards. His boot came down directly on Irene's left hand, pinning it to the concrete with his full weight. The pain was immediate and excruciating, shooting up her arm like lightning. But worse than the pain was the realization that it wasn't an accident. Garrett had seen her hand. He'd adjusted his stance deliberately. Irene bit down hard on her lip, tasting blood. She didn't cry out. Giving them that satisfaction would only make tomorrow worse. Garrett shifted his weight, grinding his boots slightly before stepping over her completely, as if she were nothing more than a crack in the pavement. "As I was saying," he continued to the formation, his voice carrying easily across the parade ground. "Standards exist for a reason. Some people belong in a military environment. Others are merely occupying space that could be better utilized by real soldiers." The message was clear. The message was always clear. After formation dismissed, Irene walked to the medical station, cradling her left hand. 3 fingers were already swelling, the skin split across 2 knuckles. The duty medic, a weary sergeant named O'Brien, examined her hand with practiced efficiency. "This is the 3rd time this month, Hill," O'Brien said quietly, not meeting her eyes. "You need to report this." "Report what?" Irene replied, her voice flat. "That I was careless during physical training? That I didn't pay attention to where I positioned my hands? O'Brien's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. They both knew how it worked. Reports went nowhere. Complaints disappeared into bureaucratic black holes. The unofficial hierarchy at Sentinel was clear. Combat soldiers at the top, support personnel somewhere in the middle, and intelligence analysts, especially civilian-recruited ones like Irene, at the absolute bottom. After her hand was wrapped, Irene returned to her quarters, a small room she shared with no one because no one wanted to bunk with the base pariah. She sat on her cot and allowed herself exactly 5 minutes of weakness. 5 minutes to feel the pain, the humiliation, the crushing weight of being utterly alone in a place that should have been about brotherhood and unity. When the 5 minutes ended, she stood up, dried her eyes, and opened the false bottom of her footlocker. Inside, hidden beneath regulation, clothing, and personal items, was a laptop that didn't appear on any base inventory. Next to it, a satellite phone that operated on encrypted frequencies that most of the soldiers at Sentinel didn't even know existed. Irene powered up the laptop and entered a 20-digit password, followed by biometric verification. The screen flickered to life, displaying not the standard military interface, but something else entirely. A black screen with a single line of white text. Valkyrie Protocol, standby mode. She'd been at Sentinel for 18 months, enduring humiliation and abuse, playing the role of the weak, incompetent analyst who couldn't hack military life. 18 months of being invisible, of being dismissed, of being broken down piece by piece. It had been the longest 18 months of her life. But it had also been necessary. Irene pulled up her mission files, skimming through intelligence that would have made Lieutenant Garrett's blood run cold if he'd known it existed. Sentinel wasn't just another forward operating base. It was a cover for something much larger, something that had been hiding in plain sight for nearly 3 years. And Irene hadn't been sent here to be an analyst. She'd been sent here to hunt. The operations building sat at the northeastern corner of Base Sentinel, a nondescript concrete structure that most soldiers passed without a second thought. Inside, the intelligence division occupied a cramped suite of offices where analysts processed satellite imagery, communications intercepts, and field reports from across the Norwegian border region. Irene arrived at her workstation at precisely 0730, as she did every morning. Her hand throbbed beneath the bandages, but she'd learned to work through pain. The other analysts barely acknowledged her presence. Some, like Lieutenant Victor Strand, actively went out of their way to make her work more difficult. Hill. Strand called from across the room, not bothering to walk over to her desk. I need those radar analysis reports from last week. The ones you were supposed to have finished 4 days ago. Irene pulled up her completed files, time-stamped from 3 days ago. Sir, I submitted those reports on Tuesday. They should be in the shared drive under Operation Folder 773. Strand's face reddened. Are you telling me I don't know how to access files, Hill? No, sir. I'm simply... You know what your problem is? Strand stood up, his voice rising to ensure everyone in the office could hear. You think being clever makes you a soldier. You think because you can speak a few languages and decode some radio chatter, you belong here. But you don't. You're a civilian, playing dress-up. And everyone knows it. The other analysts kept their heads down, focused intently on their screens. This was standard procedure at Sentinel. Witness the humiliation, say nothing, move on. Irene had stopped expecting anyone to defend her months ago. I'll resend the reports, sir, she said quietly. You'll do more than that. I want a complete reanalysis of all border communications from the past week. On my desk by 1800 hours today. That was 43 hours of work condensed into less than 11 hours. It was impossible. And Strand knew it. But that was the point. Give her impossible tasks, then punish her when she inevitably failed. Irene nodded. Yes, sir. As Strand returned to his desk, smugly satisfied, Irene opened her workstation's secondary interface. To anyone watching, it looked like she was accessing standard intelligence databases. In reality, she was tapping into a completely separate network, one that existed in parallel to Sentinel's official systems, but remained invisible to everyone except those with Valkyrie-level clearance. Her fingers moved rapidly across the keyboard despite the pain in her left hand. The reanalysis Strand had demanded would actually take her about 90 minutes, using the advanced AI-assisted decryption tools she had access to through her hidden network. She'd have it completed by 1,000 hours. Then spend the rest of the day doing what she'd actually been sent here to do. Tracking a weapons smuggling network that had penetrated deep into European military installations. The network operated under the codename Fenris, and it had been active for at least 4 years, possibly longer. Someone inside NATO's command structure was feeding classified information to hostile actors, facilitating the movement of advanced weapons systems across supposedly secure borders. Dozens of operations had been compromised, millions in military equipment had vanished, and 3 intelligence officers investigating the network had died in what were officially ruled accidents. Irene had been recruited 18 months ago by a division of military intelligence so classified that even most generals didn't know it existed. Her mission was simple in concept but brutal in execution. Embed herself at Forward Operating Base Sentinel, which intelligence suggested was a hub for Fenris activity. Maintain her cover as an incompetent analyst and identify the network's leadership. The humiliation, the abuse, the systematic breaking down of her dignity, it was all part of the cover. If she'd arrived at Sentinel as a competent, confident analyst, she would have been noticed. People would have paid attention to her work, questioned her methods, watched her too closely. But by playing the role of the weak civilian who couldn't handle military life, she'd become invisible. And invisibility was the most powerful weapon in intelligence work. Her fingers paused over the keyboard as a new communication intercept populated her screen. It was tagged with a priority marker that made her pulse quicken. The intercept had been captured 4 hours ago by a listening post in the mountains, encoded in a cipher that Sentinel's standard decryption protocols would classify as unbreakable. But Irene had broken it in 47 seconds. The message was brief. Package arriving Sentinel. 72 hours. Confirm receiving station prepared. Fenris sends. 72 hours. 3 days. Whatever Fenris was planning, it was happening soon. And it was happening here. Irene copied the intercept into her hidden network and began cross-referencing it with 6 months of intelligence she'd quietly accumulated. Patterns emerged. Connections crystallized. She'd been tracking irregular supply shipments, unexplained personnel transfers, communications that didn't match official logs. Individually, each anomaly was minor, easily dismissed. Together, they painted a picture of an operation much larger than anything intelligence had anticipated. Hill. Strand's voice shattered her concentration. Stop daydreaming and get to work. Or are you planning to fail at this assignment too? Irene minimized her screens and pulled up the analysis Strand had demanded. Working on it now. Sir, we've invested considerable effort in bringing you this story. If you find it engaging, please consider subscribing to our channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. Now, let's return to the narrative. The base cafeteria at lunch was a social hierarchy made visible. Combat units occupied the tables near the windows, their conversations loud and confident. Support personnel filled the middle section. Quieter, but still part of the community. And then there was the back corner near the kitchen doors, where Irene sat alone, as she had for 18 months. She ate mechanically, her mind processing the morning's intercept. 72 hours meant Thursday evening. Today was Monday. Whatever Fenris was planning, she had 3 days to identify the players and stop it. The problem was that her cover required her to remain weak and incompetent. She couldn't suddenly display the skills that would allow her to investigate properly. "Is this seat taken?" a voice asked. Irene looked up to find Captain Alexander Novak standing with his tray. Novak was a recent transfer to Sentinel, assigned to coordinate joint operations with Scandinavian partner forces. He was in his early 30s, with the weathered look of someone who'd seen combat, and unlike most officers at Sentinel, he'd never been openly hostile to her. "It's all yours, sir," Irene said, surprised. Officers rarely sat in this section of the cafeteria. Novak settled across from her, his expression thoughtful. "I've been watching you, Hill, for about 2 weeks now." Irene's heart rate spiked, but she kept her face neutral. "Sir? You're good at being invisible," Novak continued, cutting into his food. "Most people here don't even register your presence. But I've noticed something interesting. Every report you submit, every analysis you complete, it's technically flawless. The work is exceptional, yet somehow you've cultivated this reputation as incompetent." "I make a lot of mistakes, sir," Irene replied carefully. "No, you don't. You submit work that's just good enough not to draw attention, but never good enough to stand out. That's a very specific skill set, Hill. One that makes me wonder what you're really doing here." Irene met his eyes, trying to read his intention. Was Novak part of Fenris? Was this a test? Or was he genuinely curious? "I'm doing my job, sir. Or trying to, at least." Novak leaned back, studying her. "I transferred here from intelligence operations in Estonia. Spent 3 years tracking weapons networks operating along the Russian border. I know what a deep cover operative looks like, Hill. The question is, who are you really working for?" Before Irene could respond, Lieutenant Garrett appeared at their table, his expression darkening when he saw Novak. "Captain, I wouldn't waste your time with Hill. She's not worth the effort. I'll decide how I spend my time." "Lieutenant," Novak replied coolly. "Was there something you needed?" Garrett's jaw tightened. "Just offering friendly advice, sir. Hill has a way of disappointing people who put faith in her." After Garrett stalked away, Novak turned back to Irene. "Let me be direct. I think something is happening at this base. Something that doesn't add up. Equipment manifests that don't match inventory. Communications that disappear from logs. Personnel transfers that make no operational sense. And I think you've noticed these things too." Irene's mind raced. Novak was either an ally or the most dangerous threat she'd faced. "Sir, I'm just an analyst." "I don't." "Stop," Novak interrupted quietly. "Whatever game you're playing, whatever mission you're on, you need to know that you're running out of time. I've identified at least 3 major security breaches in the past month, and Command has ignored every report I've filed. Either someone at the top is compromised, or there's an operation happening that I'm not cleared to know about. Why are you telling me this? Because you're the only person on this base who seems to be paying attention to the right things. And because in about 72 hours, I think something significant is going to happen. I don't know what, but I can feel it." Irene's blood ran cold. Novak had noticed the same timeline. That couldn't be coincidence. That evening, Irene accessed her secure network from a maintenance closet near the communications center. It was one of 7 locations around the base where she could work without risk of surveillance. The closet was cramped and smelled of cleaning chemicals, but it offered privacy and access to the base's main data conduits. She pulled up Captain Novak's service record, running it through every verification protocol she had access to. Born in Prague, military family, decorated service record in intelligence operations. Multiple commendations for counterintelligence work. His transfer to Sentinel had been requested personally by Colonel Werner, the base commander. That last detail made her pause. Colonel Werner was one of 3 prime suspects in the Fenris investigation. If Werner had specifically requested Novak's transfer, it meant one of 2 things. Either Novak was part of the network, or Werner wanted someone he could control nearby. Irene dug deeper, accessing classified personnel files that technically didn't exist. What she found made her reconsider everything. Novak had been investigated 3 times for unauthorized intelligence gathering. Each investigation had been quietly closed with no formal charges, but the pattern was clear. Novak had a habit of pursuing leads that his superiors wanted buried. Her encrypted phone vibrated. A message from her handler appeared. "Fenris activity accelerating. Package confirmed as weapons-grade material. Identify receiving party before arrival. Authorization granted for protocol escalation if necessary." Protocol escalation. That meant she could break cover if the mission required it. For 18 months, she'd endured abuse and humiliation to maintain her role. The thought of finally dropping the mask was both thrilling and terrifying. A noise in the corridor outside made her freeze. Footsteps. Deliberate and measured. Someone was approaching the maintenance closet. Irene quickly powered down her laptop and slipped it into her jacket. She grabbed a cleaning supply catalog from a shelf, positioning herself to look like she'd been inventorying supplies. The door opened. Lieutenant Strand stood in the doorway, his expression suspicious. "Hill? What are you doing in here?" "Supply inventory, sir. Someone reported we're low on cleaning solvents." Strand's eyes narrowed. "At 2,100 hours? In the dark?" Irene gestured to the catalog. "I'm behind on my work, sir. Trying to catch up where I can." "You're always behind, Hill. Makes me wonder if you're actually incompetent or if you're hiding something." He stepped into the closet, forcing her backward. "See, I've been thinking about you. About how someone with your supposed qualifications ends up being such a failure. It doesn't add up." "I don't understand, sir." "I think you do. I think you're smarter than you pretend to be, and I think you've been watching things that aren't your concern." His hand shot out, grabbing her injured hand and squeezing. The pain was immediate and blinding. "Who are you really, Hill? What are you looking for?" Irene could have ended this confrontation in seconds. Her training included advanced combat techniques that would leave Strand unconscious before he realized what happened. But breaking cover now would compromise everything. So, she did what she'd been doing for 18 months. She endured. "Sir, please, you're hurting me." Strand squeezed harder, his face inches from hers. "Answer the question. What are you really doing here?" "Trying to survive, sir. That's all. Just trying to survive." He held her gaze for another moment, then released her hand with a disgusted sound. "Pathetic. Get out of here, Hill, and if I catch you lurking around places you shouldn't be again, I'll make sure you're transferred to some place that makes Sentinel look like paradise." Tuesday morning brought clear skies and rising tension. Irene arrived at formation with her hand throbbing, new bruises blooming across her fingers where Strand had grabbed her. She took her place in the ranks, invisible as always, while Lieutenant Garrett conducted inspection. What happened next would become the defining moment that divided before and after. Garrett stopped in front of her, his expression contemptuous. "Hill, your boots are disgraceful. When's the last time you properly cleaned them?" "This morning, sir." "Don't lie to me. Drop 50 push-ups. Now." Irene dropped to the ground, positioning her hands carefully to avoid putting pressure on her injured fingers. She began counting, her voice steady despite the pain. Around her, 200 soldiers watched or pretended not to watch, as they always did. At push-up 15, Garrett stepped forward. His boot hovered over her right hand, the one that wasn't injured. "You know what I think, Hill? I think you're weak. I think you're a disgrace to this uniform. I think—" His boot came down. Not on her hand this time, but directly on her back, forcing her flat against the concrete. The impact drove the air from her lungs. Then his boot moved to her left hand, the injured one, pressing down with deliberate, cruel pressure. Something in Irene broke. Not her body, she could endure physical pain, but something deeper. Something that had been compressed and contained for 18 months. The mission required her to maintain cover, to stay invisible, to accept humiliation. But the mission had also given her authorization for protocol escalation. In that moment, lying on the concrete with Garrett's boot crushing her hand, Irene made a decision. Some missions required invisibility. Others required visibility. It was time to become visible. She spoke 2 words, quietly, but with absolute clarity. "Valkyrie-1." The effect was immediate and profound. Garrett's boot lifted as if he'd stepped on something electrified. Across the parade ground, 3 soldiers who'd been watching with careful neutrality suddenly stood straighter, their expressions transforming from blank observation to sharp attention. These were her support team, embedded at Sentinel for 18 months just like her, maintaining their own covers as ordinary soldiers. But more significantly, in the operations building behind them, An automated system registered those 2 words. Alarms began sounding in secure facilities across 3 countries. Encrypted messages shot through military intelligence networks. And in the space of 30 seconds, the nature of forward operating base Sentinel changed completely. Colonel Werner emerged from the command building at a run, his face pale. Captain Novak appeared from the logistics area, his hand instinctively moving toward his sidearm before he caught himself. Lieutenant Strand stumbled out of the operations building, confusion written across his features. And Lieutenant Garrett, who'd spent 18 months making Irene's life miserable, who'd just moments ago been grinding his boot into her hand, stood frozen as he finally understood that he'd been tormenting someone he should have feared. The parade ground transformed into controlled chaos. Soldiers who'd been standing in formation broke ranks, some moving toward Irene, others backing away. The 3 members of her support team who'd been embedded as ordinary soldiers formed a protective perimeter around her as she stood, brushing concrete dust from her uniform. Colonel Werner reached her first, his expression a mixture of shock and anger. "Hill? You're VALKYRIE-1?" Irene met his eyes with a level gaze that contained none of the deference or weakness he'd grown accustomed to seeing from her. "Colonel Werner, I'm activating emergency protocols under Article 17 of NATO counterintelligence operations. This base is now under Valkyrie authority until further notice." "This is insane," Werner sputtered. "You're a junior analyst. You don't have authority to." "Sir, I need you to step back." The words came from Sergeant Elena Petrov, one of Irene's support team. Petrov had spent 18 months playing the role of a mechanic in the motor pool. Now, she stood with the bearing of someone who'd commanded special operations units. Valkyrie protocols supersede normal command structure. Captain Novak pushed through the gathering crowd, his expression intense. "Someone want to explain what the hell is happening?" Irene turned to him. "Captain, you were correct about the security breaches. This base is compromised. Someone in command is facilitating a weapons smuggling network called Fenris. In approximately 48 hours, they're expecting delivery of weapons-grade materials. I'm here to stop that delivery and identify everyone involved." Lieutenant Garrett had gone white. "This is ridiculous. Hill is a civilian analyst. She's not qualified for any of this. I hold the rank of Major in NATO Joint Intelligence Operations," Irene said quietly. "I have a master's degree in cryptography from Cambridge, completed special operations training at Hereford, and I've been running deep cover operations for 4 years. The last 18 months playing incompetent analyst was my mission, Lieutenant. You were never my superior officer. You were my cover." The words hung in the air like smoke. 18 months of humiliation recontextualized in an instant. Every moment of abuse, every dismissal, every casual cruelty, all of it had been observed, documented, and ultimately meaningless, because the person they'd been tormenting had more authority than anyone on the base except the colonel. "I don't believe this," Strand said, emerging from the crowd. "Werner, you can't possibly accept this. She's lying. This is some kind of breakdown. She's..." "Strand, shut up." Werner's voice was hoarse. He pulled out his phone, made a call that lasted 20 seconds, then looked at Irene with something approaching fear. "You're confirmed. Brussels just verified your credentials and your authority. Valkyrie protocol is active." Irene nodded. "Colonel, I need you to gather all senior personnel in the command briefing room immediately. Captain Novak, you're with me. You were right about the security breaches, and I need your operational knowledge." She turned to her support team. "Petrov, lock down all external communications. Ramirez, secure the armory. Costas, I want complete surveillance of all personnel movements for the next 6 hours." Her team moved with precision, each member dropping their 18-month cover to reveal the elite operators they actually were. Around the parade ground, ordinary soldiers watched with growing comprehension. The base they thought they knew had just revealed itself to be something entirely different. The command briefing room filled within 10 minutes. Colonel Werner sat at the head of the table, his command suddenly in question. Beside him sat Major Anders, the executive officer, and Captain Novak. Lieutenant Garrett and Lieutenant Strand stood near the back, both looking like they'd witnessed something impossible. Irene stood at the front of the room, her injured hand throbbing but forgotten. On the screen behind her, she displayed classified intelligence that made several officers gasp. Satellite imagery showing irregular supply movements, communications intercepts in cipher, financial transactions that didn't appear in official records. For 18 months, I've been embedded at Sentinel investigating Fenris, a weapons smuggling network that's penetrated NATO operations across 6 countries, Irene began. This base is a critical node in their distribution system. Tomorrow evening, they're expecting delivery of weapons-grade materials that will be routed through Sentinel's supply chains to hostile actors. That's impossible, Major Anders protested. Every supply shipment is logged and verified. We have strict protocols that someone with command access has been circumventing. Irene pulled up another screen showing altered manifests. Someone has been using Sentinel's legitimate supply operations as cover for smuggling. Small quantities, moved carefully, but over 3 years it adds up to enough material to build several dirty bombs. The room went silent. Werner leaned forward, his voice tight. Do you know who? I have 3 suspects. Each has the access and authority to manipulate supply records. Each has exhibited behavioral patterns consistent with Fenris operatives. She paused, meeting Werner's eyes. You're one of them, Colonel. Werner's face flushed red. How dare you? I dare because it's my job. Major Anders, you're suspect 2. And Lieutenant Strand, you're suspect 3. Irene let that settle. One of you is Fenris. The others are innocent, but I haven't been able to identify which until now. Novak spoke up. What changed? Fenris knows their cover is broken. Speaking VALKYRIE-1 just triggered alerts across multiple intelligence networks. The guilty party knows they have about 48 hours before Brussels sends a full investigation team. That creates pressure. Pressure makes people act. And when they act, they reveal themselves. Strand stepped forward, his voice shaking. This is ridiculous. I'm not a traitor. Check my records, my background, everything. I've served with distinction for 8 years. So has everyone in this room, Irene replied calmly. That's what makes Fenris so effective. They recruit people with impeccable records, people above suspicion. Then they exploit personal vulnerabilities, financial problems, family issues, ideological grievances, something that makes betrayal seem justified. Werner stood abruptly. I won't sit here and be accused by someone who's been lying about her identity for 18 months. For all we know, you're the security breach, Hill, or should I say Major. This whole VALKYRIE story could be an elaborate cover for your own operation. That's why I've already transmitted my credentials to NATO headquarters. General Christensen will be arriving by helicopter within 2 hours to verify my authority and oversee the investigation. Irene pulled up a final screen, showing encrypted communications. Until then, this base is in lockdown. No one leaves. No communications go out except through secured channels that my team controls. You're confining us to base? Anders asked incredulously. I'm protecting the innocent and constraining the guilty. One of you is going to make a mistake in the next 48 hours. When you do, I'll be watching. The briefing ended with officers leaving in shocked silence. Only Novak remained, studying Irene with new understanding. 18 months, he said quietly. 18 months of abuse, humiliation, being treated like you were worthless. All cover, all necessary. Irene corrected. Fenris only recruits people they think they can control or exploit. Playing weak made me invisible. Invisible people see everything. Garrett and Strand, the way they treated you, made my cover more believable. If I'd been competent from day one, the real operative would have noticed, would have suspected. Being the base failure kept me safe. She met his eyes. You suspected, anyway. That's impressive. Novak smiled slightly. I spent 3 years hunting Russian intelligence operatives. You learn to spot people who are pretending to be something they're not. The question is, why bring me into this now? Because you're not one of my suspects, and because I need someone who knows this base's operations intimately. You've only been here 6 weeks, which means you can't be Fenris. But you've been investigating the same anomalies I have. So what do we do now? We wait. And we watch. Fenris will make contact with their operative soon. They need to coordinate the material pickup. When they do, we'll be ready. Night fell over Base Sentinel like a curtain, but sleep was impossible. Irene sat in a secure operations room that had been hastily established in the communications building. Surrounded by monitors showing surveillance feeds from across the base. Her support team worked quietly around her, analyzing data streams and monitoring communications. Sergeant Petrov approached with coffee and a medical kit. "Your hand needs proper treatment, Major. That wrapping is barely holding." After, Irene replied, her eyes fixed on the monitors. "Right now, I need to stay focused. You've been focused for 18 months. Take 10 minutes. Irene allowed Petrov to unwrap and properly bandage her hand. The fingers were swollen and bruised, possibly fractured, but functional. She'd endured worse during training. What bothered her more was that she'd let Garrett get to her, let the humiliation penetrate deep enough that breaking cover became necessary. "Do you regret it?" Petrov asked, as if reading her thoughts. "Activating Valkyrie? We were running out of time. The package arrives tomorrow. If I'd maintained cover another day, we might have missed our window." Irene flexed her hand experimentally. "But yes, part of me wishes I could have held out longer, seen how far they'd go." They stomped on your hands at formation. In front of 200 witnesses. How much further could they go? Irene thought about Lieutenant Garrett's boot crushing her fingers, about Strand's threats in the maintenance closet, about 18 months of systematic dehumanization. "You're right. It was time." Movement on one of the monitors caught her attention. Colonel Werner, leaving his quarters at 0200 hours. He moved quickly toward the administrative building, looking over his shoulder repeatedly. Irene leaned forward, her pulse quickening. "Ramirez. Where's Werner going?" "Tracking now, Major. He's entering the admin building through the rear entrance. Unusual for this hour. Get me audio if possible. And visual inside the building." The team worked quickly, tapping into security systems. Werner appeared on screen inside what looked like a file storage room. He was alone, searching through physical documents rather than digital files. Smart physical files left fewer traces. Then he pulled out a satellite phone. Not a military-issue device, but something commercial, untraceable. He dialed, waited, then spoke quietly. The audio was poor, but Irene caught fragments. "Situation compromised. Valkyrie activated. Need to abort delivery. We've got him," Costas said triumphantly. "Werner's Fenris." "Wait," Irene cautioned, watching Werner's body language. Something felt wrong. The colonel looked frightened, not calculating. "Keep recording. I want everything." Werner continued. "Tried to warn you months ago, this base wasn't secure. Hill was too observant, even before we knew who she really was. You need to call this off before Brussels gets involved." Irene frowned. Werner's words suggested he knew about Fenris but wasn't directing operations. He was reporting to someone, not commanding. "Ramirez, can you trace that call?" "Working on it. The phone's using satellite encryption, but got it. Calls going to Major Anders' personal residence." The pieces suddenly rearranged themselves in Irene's mind. Anders was the executive officer, Werner's second in command. Anders had unrestricted access to all base operations and supply systems. Anders had been at Sentinel for 4 years, since before Fenris activity began showing up in intelligence reports. "Petrov, where's Anders now?" Petrov checked her monitors. "His quarters. Lights are on. Wait, he's moving. Heading toward the motor pool. At 0200 hours? That's not right. Costas, get a team to the motor pool now. Non-lethal containment, But I want Anders secured. Major. Novak's voice came through her earpiece. He'd been monitoring from a separate location. If Anders is Fenris, he might have a contingency plan. An escape route or a way to trigger the weapons delivery early. Understood. I'm moving to intercept. Irene grabbed her jacket and sidearm, then paused at the door. For 18 months, she'd been unarmed, untrained, unthreatening. Now, she was about to confront an enemy operative who'd spent years building this network. The transition from Analyst Hill to Major Hill felt both natural and surreal. She ran across the base toward the motor pool, her team converging from multiple directions. They'd trained for this moment. Now it was time to execute. The motor pool sat dark and silent, rows of vehicles casting long shadows under scattered security lights. Irene approached from the east with Petrov, while Costas and Ramirez covered the western exits. Somewhere inside, Major Anders was preparing to run. "Major, I've got movement near the cargo trucks," Petrov whispered through the comm system. "One person. Moving deliberately. Hold position. Let's see what he's doing." They watched as Anders emerged from between two trucks carrying a large military duffel bag. He moved with purpose, not panic, checking his watch and scanning the area. He approached a civilian SUV, parked at the edge of the lot, a vehicle that shouldn't have been there. "That's not a base vehicle," Irene noted. Someone provided him with transportation. Anders opened the SUV's rear door and began loading the duffel bag. In the security lighting, Irene caught a glimpse of the bag's contents: communications, equipment, documents, and what looked like portable hard drives. Anders was evacuating with intelligence. "All units, move in. I want him contained, not harmed." They closed in from 3 directions, weapons drawn. Anders saw them coming and froze, his hand instinctively moving toward his sidearm before stopping. He was trained enough to know he couldn't outdraw 4 operators with superior positions. "Major Anders," Irene called out, her voice echoing across the motor pool. "Step away from the vehicle with your hands visible." For a moment, Anders considered his options. Then his shoulders sagged and he raised his hands. "I should have known. Werner called you VALKYRIE-1, but I thought it was hysteria. I didn't believe NATO would actually embed someone that deep. For 3 years, you've been smuggling weapons through this base," Irene said, approaching carefully. "You've compromised operations, endangered lives, and betrayed everyone who trusted you. Why?" Anders laughed bitterly. "Why? You want the whole tragic story? Financial problems? Sick daughter? Hospital bills that military insurance wouldn't cover? It's pathetically predictable, isn't it? Fenris found my weakness and exploited it. They paid for my daughter's treatment, and in return, I helped them move packages through Sentinel's supply chain." "Your daughter's treatment," Irene repeated. "That's your justification for putting weapons in the hands of terrorists?" "I never knew what was in the packages." Anders' voice rose. "They told me it was industrial equipment, restricted exports, nothing dangerous. By the time I realized what I was actually moving, they owned me. They had recordings, evidence, everything. If I'd stopped, my daughter would have died, and I'd have gone to prison." Petrov moved forward to secure Anders, but Irene held up a hand. "The delivery tomorrow. What's coming?" "I don't know specifics. Fenris compartmentalizes everything. I just know it's the biggest package yet, something that made even my handler nervous." Anders met Irene's eyes. "They're going to detonate something, aren't they? That's what this is really about." "We believe so." "Where's the delivery happening?" "Supply Depot 3, the one on the northern perimeter. There's a maintenance tunnel that connects to civilian road access. A truck will arrive at 2,200 hours tomorrow with legitimate medical supplies. The package will be hidden inside surgical equipment containers." Irene processed this information quickly. "Who's your handler? Who runs Fenris?" Anders hesitated, genuine fear crossing his face. "I've never met them in person. All communications are electronic. But I know the code name. Odin. And I know they're still on this base." "Still on this base," Costas repeated. "Anders, you're the only suspect left. I'm not Odin. I'm just a courier." A facilitator. Odin is someone with real authority. Someone who can move through command structures without suspicion. Anders glanced around nervously. And they know you're here. Major Hill. Odin's been tracking your investigation for weeks. A cold realization settled over Irene. If Fenris had been tracking her investigation, they'd known she was more than she appeared. They'd allowed her to maintain her cover because it suited their purposes. The abuse, the humiliation, it had kept her contained while they finalized their biggest operation. Who knew about my investigation? She asked. I don't know. Odin told me to watch you, to make sure you stayed focused on routine analysis. They said you were digging into areas that could compromise operations. Anders' voice dropped. When you activated Valkyrie, Odin sent me a message. Package delivery accelerated. Contingency Protocol 13. I don't know what that means, but it scared me enough to run. Irene's mind raced through possibilities. Contingency Protocol 13. An accelerated delivery. Someone on base with enough authority to track a classified investigation. The pieces were there, but they weren't quite fitting together yet. Petrov. Secure Anders. Costas. I want that SUV searched completely. Ramirez. Get me Colonel Werner. I need to know exactly who he called. As her team moved to execute orders, Captain Novak's voice crackled through her earpiece. Major, we have a problem. I've been reviewing the Valkyrie activation logs. When you spoke those words at formation, the automated alert went to multiple recipients. NATO headquarters in Brussels, Norwegian military intelligence, and one other location. What location? The base commander's office. But not Werner's terminal. His private computer. The one only he has access codes for. Irene felt pieces clicking into place. Novak, where's Werner now? He left the admin building about 10 minutes ago. I lost track of him in the residential area. Find him. Now. Werner wasn't in his quarters. He wasn't in the command building. As Irene and her team searched the base, a terrible suspicion grew. Werner had called someone using an untraceable phone, warning them that Valkyrie was active. But what if that call wasn't reporting to ODIN? What if it was warning us accomplice? Major, I've got something. Ramirez called through the comm. Werner's personal computer accessed encrypted files 30 minutes ago. Files related to weapons specifications and delivery protocols. The access code matches Werner's credentials. But the physical login occurred from the operations building, not his office. Irene stopped mid-stride. The operations building, where Lieutenant Strand oversaw intelligence analysis, where she'd worked for 18 months under his hostile supervision, where he'd cornered her in the maintenance closet, asking questions about what she was really doing. Strand, she breathed. It's Strand. Major. That doesn't make sense, Costas argued. Strand's a lieutenant. He doesn't have the authority to run an operation like Fenris. He doesn't need command authority. He needs information authority. Strand oversees intelligence analysis, which means he sees everything. Every report, every intercept, every investigation. He'd know if someone was digging into Fenris operations. Irene started running toward the operations building, and he's been at Sentinel for 6 years. Long before anyone suspected this base was compromised. The operations building was dark except for emergency lighting. Irene entered through the main door, her sidearm drawn, Petrov and Costas flanking her. The intelligence analysis room was empty. Computers powered down. No sign of activity. Then she heard it. Voices from the secure communications room, a space that should have been locked down by her team. She approached quietly, listening. Don't care what excuses you have, Colonel. The operation is compromised. We evacuate now with whatever materials we can salvage. Strand's voice, sharp with authority, she'd never heard him use before. My family, Werner's voice, desperate. Your family is irrelevant. Fenris takes care of its operatives, but only if they follow orders. You should have eliminated Hill months ago, when Odin first flagged her as suspicious. Irene processed that in seconds. Werner wasn't Odin. Werner was another victim, Another person Fenris had compromised through family pressure. Strand had been using Werner's authority while remaining invisible himself. She kicked open the door. Weapon raised. "Lieutenant Strand, step away from the communications equipment." The scene inside was surreal. Strand stood at the main console, his hands moving across keyboards with practiced efficiency. Werner sat, slumped in a chair, his face buried in his hands. Between them, on a monitor, was the face of someone Irene recognized from classified briefings. General Viktor Ruslan, a Russian intelligence officer, believed to be running weapons networks across Europe. Strand didn't look surprised to see her. Instead, he smiled. "Major Hill, or should I say Major Valkyrie, you're more resourceful than we anticipated." "We? Fenris is more than a smuggling network, Major. It's a decades-long intelligence operation. We've been inside NATO since the Cold War ended, waiting, building, preparing. Your investigation found one small piece of something much larger." On the monitor, General Ruslan spoke in accented English. "Major, I compliment your dedication. 18 months undercover is impressive. But you've triggered something you cannot stop. The package arrives in 6 hours, not tomorrow. Your activation of Valkyrie protocols convinced us to accelerate the timeline." Irene kept her weapon trained on Strand. 6 hours? That's impossible, Anders said. Anders knew what we wanted him to know. Strand interrupted. He's been a useful distraction. While you waste time interrogating him, our actual delivery is already in progress. By dawn, weapons-grade materials will be distributed across 3 countries, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. Then why are you still here? If the operation's already successful, why not evacuate? Strand's smile widened. Because some missions require sacrifice. Because witnessing your failure is worth the risk. And because, Major Hill, you need to understand something important. Fenris doesn't fear your protocols or your investigations. We've survived for 30 years by being patient. This is just one operation. Even if you stop it, there will be others. Petrov and Kostas burst through the door behind Irene, weapons ready. Strand raised his hands slowly, but his expression remained confident, almost amused. "Viktor Strand," Irene said, using his full name deliberately, "also known as ODIN, I'm placing you under arrest for treason, weapons trafficking, and crimes against NATO member states. You can arrest me, Major. But the package is already moving. And the person transporting it? Someone you trust completely. Someone who's been helping your investigation from the beginning." Irene's blood went cold. "What are you talking about?" "Captain Novak," Strand said simply. "Did you really think his transfer here was coincidence? Did you think his suspicious behavior was genuine investigation? Fenris placed him at Sentinel specifically to monitor your operation. And right now, he's personally transporting our package through a route your team isn't even watching." The world seemed to tilt. Irene had trusted Novak, had brought him into her confidence, had revealed operational details. If Strand was telling the truth, Ramirez, she barked into her comm. "Location on Captain Novak." Now. Static. Then Ramirez's voice, confused. "Major, Novak left the base 20 minutes ago. He showed security authorization that looked legitimate. He's driving north toward the civilian checkpoint." Irene felt the mission slipping through her fingers. She'd been so focused on identifying Fenris inside the base that she hadn't considered they might have prepared an external contingency. Novak had played his role perfectly, the suspicious officer who seemed to be investigating the same anomalies, who'd confronted her at exactly the right moment to seem genuine. "Major." General Ruslan's voice came through the monitor. "You've lost. Accept it with grace. Strand will tell you nothing useful. The package will reach its destination, and Fenris will continue operating long after you've moved on to your next failed investigation." Irene looked at Strand, at Werner's broken form, at the monitor showing an enemy general who believed he'd won. She thought about 18 months of humiliation, of planning, of waiting for exactly this moment. And she smiled. "You're right about one thing," she said calmly. "I can't stop Novak from delivering the package. But I don't need to." She pulled out her encrypted phone and sent a single code. Thor 9. Strand's confidence faltered. "What did you just do?" "Something you didn't anticipate. Valkyrie protocols include contingency plans for external threats. When I activated Valkyrie-1, I also activated a larger operation. Norwegian military intelligence has been tracking vehicles leaving this base for the past 12 hours. Every route, every checkpoint, every possible exit." She pulled up a map on her phone showing multiple military units positioned along roads leading away from Sentinel. "Captain Novak's vehicle is currently being intercepted by a tactical team 30 kilometers north of here. Whatever package he's carrying will be secured within the next 5 minutes. Strand's face went pale. On the monitor, General Ruslan's expression shifted from confidence to fury. "This isn't over." "Yes, it is." Irene terminated the connection. "Petrov, take Strand into custody. Costas, get medical attention for Colonel Werner. And someone get General Christensen on the line. He needs to know we've just rolled up the largest Fenris cell in NATO." As her team moved to execute orders, Irene allowed herself one moment of satisfaction. 18 months of abuse, of being dismissed and humiliated and broken down. All of it had been worth it to reach this moment. Lieutenant Strand Odin was in custody. The weapons delivery was interdicted. And Fenris's 30-year infiltration of NATO was finally being exposed. The woman they'd stomped on at formation had just dismantled an intelligence network that had survived since the Cold War. Not bad for someone they'd considered incompetent. Dawn broke over Base Sentinel with unusual clarity. As if the night's events had washed the air clean, Irene stood in the command center, coordinating with NATO headquarters, while her team processed the evidence they'd collected. Strand sat in secure detention, refusing to speak without legal counsel. Werner was under medical observation, his cooperation purchased with promises of leniency for his family. And Captain Novak, intercepted 30 kilometers north with a cargo container full of weapons-grade materials, was being transported back to the base under heavy guard. General Christensen arrived by helicopter at 0700, accompanied by a team of investigators from Brussels. He was a tall Norwegian officer with silver hair and the bearing of someone who'd spent 40 years in military intelligence. His first words to Irene were direct. "Major Hill, I've read your reports for 18 months. Every one of them was coded with intelligence assessments that your supposed superiors never saw. Brilliant work." He shook her hand carefully, noting the bandages. "Though I understand the cost was significant." "The mission required it, sir," Irene replied. "The mission required you to endure abuse and humiliation for a year and a half. That goes beyond operational requirements, Major. What happened to you here was unacceptable, regardless of cover requirements." Irene appreciated his words, but she'd made peace with her choices months ago. "Sir, with respect, the abuse made me invisible. If I'd been treated as a competent officer, Fenris would have noticed. They would have altered their operations or eliminated me. Being dismissed as incompetent kept me alive and operational." Christensen studied her with sharp eyes. "You're rationalizing trauma, Major. We'll be providing counseling and support as part of your post-mission debrief. That's not optional." Before Irene could respond, Ramirez approached with an update. "Major, Novak's requesting to speak with you. Says he has information about the larger Fenris network." "I'm sure he does," Christensen said dryly. "Captured operatives always have information to trade once they realize the severity of their situation. Will you take the interview, Major? Or would you prefer someone else to handle it?" Irene thought about Novak's careful cultivation of her trust, his calculated performance of suspicion and investigation. He'd played his role as well as she'd played hers. The difference was their intentions. "I'll handle it, sir." The interrogation room was sparse and cold. Novak sat with his hands cuffed to the table, his confident bearing from previous days completely absent. When Irene entered, he looked up with something that might have been shame or might have been calculation. "Major Hill, he began. "I want you to know. Save it." Irene interrupted, sitting across from him. "You're going to tell me that you were forced into this? That Fenris had leverage on you? That you're actually a patriot who made difficult choices? I've heard it all before. Right now, I only care about one thing. The larger network. How many other bases are compromised?" Novak's expression shifted, recognizing that emotional appeals wouldn't work. "For that I know of. Possibly more. Fenris has been recruiting inside NATO for 30 years. They find people with vulnerabilities, pressure points that can be exploited. Financial problems, family issues, ideological grievances. Like they did with Anders. Anders was easy. Sick child, crushing debt, desperate for any solution. They paid for his daughter's treatment and owned him completely." Novak met her eyes, but others joined voluntarily. "People who believe NATO is corrupt, that Western military intervention causes more harm than good. True believers are more dangerous than the compromised." "And which category do you fall into?" Irene asked. Novak was silent for a moment. "I was recruited 8 years ago. My brother was killed in a NATO operation in Afghanistan. Friendly fire that was covered up to avoid political embarrassment. When Fenris approached me with proof of what really happened, offered me a way to strike back at the system that killed him and lied about it, I took it. So you became a traitor." "I became someone who believed he was fighting against corruption. By the time I realized Fenris wasn't about justice or accountability, that they were simply using my anger to facilitate weapons trafficking, I was already too deep. They had recordings, evidence of my activities. Leaving wasn't an option." Irene listened without sympathy. She'd spent 18 months having her dignity stripped away piece by piece for a mission. Novak had spent 8 years betraying his oath because he couldn't handle his grief and anger appropriately. "The 4 bases you mentioned. I need names, locations, and your assessment of who's compromised at each." "I'll tell you everything," Novak said, "but I need guarantees. Protection for my family, consideration for cooperation in my sentencing." "You'll get what you've earned, Captain. Nothing more." Irene stood. "Your information will be verified independently. If it's accurate and complete, that will be noted in your file. But don't expect gratitude or mercy. You helped smuggle weapons that could have killed thousands. Whatever consequences you face are entirely deserved." She left Novak sitting alone in the interrogation room, his attempt at redemption falling flat. Some betrayals were too complete to be forgiven. Outside, General Christensen was waiting. "How did it go?" "He'll talk. Whether his information is valuable remains to be seen." Irene checked her watch. "Sir, what happens now? To the base, to the people who didn't know what was happening? Sentinel will undergo complete security review. Anyone with potential Fenris connections will be investigated. Lieutenant Garrett and Lieutenant Strand will face courts-martial for their treatment of you, regardless of operational justification." Christensen paused. "And you, Major, will be reassigned. Your cover here is completely blown. Every soldier on this base now knows you're not the incompetent analyst they believed you were." Irene looked out across the base, at the soldiers going about their duties in the morning sun. For 18 months, this had been her world, her prison, her mission. Leaving it felt both liberating and strange. "Where will I be assigned, sir?" "That's up to you. After what you've accomplished, you can write your own ticket. Training Command, Analysis Division, Operational Planning. Name it." Irene thought about 18 months of being dismissed, of proving that perception didn't define reality. "I'd like to stay in deep cover operations, sir. There are more networks like Fenris out there. More people who need to be stopped." Christensen smiled. "I was hoping you'd say that. We have several ongoing investigations that could use someone with your particular skills. Someone who knows how to become invisible when necessary." 3 months later, Irene stood once again at a military base, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of gold and amber. But this base wasn't Sentinel, and she wasn't the dismissed analyst anymore. She was Major Irene Hill, instructor at NATO's Advanced Intelligence Operations School, teaching the next generation of deep cover operatives. Her students sat in rows before her, young officers from a dozen countries, all eager to learn the skills that would keep them alive in hostile environments. Irene's reputation had preceded her. The story of VALKYRIE-1, the analyst who'd endured 18 months of abuse to dismantle a 30-year-old espionage network, had become legendary in intelligence circles. Deep cover operations require more than technical skill, she told them, her voice carrying across the classroom. They require psychological resilience, the ability to maintain a persona even when that persona is being systematically degraded, to accept humiliation, abuse, and dismissal while never losing sight of your mission. A young lieutenant raised her hand. "Major, how did you do it? How did you endure 18 months of being treated that way without breaking?" Irene thought about Lieutenant Garrett's boot crushing her hand, about Strand's threats in the maintenance closet, about countless moments of casual cruelty that had accumulated into a mountain of pain. "I remembered that perception isn't reality," she said simply. "They saw me as weak, incompetent, unworthy, but what they saw was a role I was playing, not who I actually was. The real me was documenting their network, gathering evidence, preparing for the moment when the mission required me to reveal myself." "But didn't it hurt?" another student asked. "Being treated that way, even knowing it was part of the cover?" "Yes," Irene admitted. "It hurt every single day. The physical abuse was painful, but the emotional degradation was worse. Being dismissed, being treated as if you don't matter, as if your presence is an inconvenience that damages something fundamental, even when you know it's not real." She held up her left hand, showing scars that had healed but would never completely disappear. "These are reminders of what the mission cost, but they're also reminders of what was achieved. Fenris lost 4 major operational cells. 17 officers are facing courts-martial. Weapons that would have killed thousands were intercepted. That's worth a few scars." The class fell silent, absorbing the weight of what deep cover work actually meant. These weren't Hollywood spies with glamorous assignments. They were officers who might spend years living a lie, enduring abuse, waiting for the moment when their sacrifice would matter. "Major," a captain from Germany asked, "do you regret it? If you could go back, knowing what it would cost, would you still accept the assignment?" Irene considered the question carefully. She thought about the counseling sessions she'd attended after leaving Sentinel, working through trauma she hadn't fully acknowledged during the mission. She thought about nightmares where she was back at formation, invisible and helpless. She thought about relationships she'd sacrificed and pieces of herself that had been damaged in ways that might never fully heal. "Yes," she said finally, "because the mission was bigger than my comfort or my dignity. Because soldiers like Anders, who were compromised and exploited, deserved someone fighting for them. Because every weapon we intercepted was a life we saved. Would I volunteer for it again? Probably not. But I'd make the same choice if it was necessary." After class ended, Irene returned to her office and found a message waiting from General Christensen. The Fenris investigation had expanded based on information extracted from Strand and Novak. 8 more bases had been identified as compromised. NATO was conducting the largest counterintelligence operation in its history, and they wanted her expertise for the next phase. Irene read through the mission briefing, noting the timeline, the risks, the requirement for deep cover. This assignment would be different from Sentinel, different location, different persona, different threats. But the core challenge remained the same. Become invisible. Endure whatever was necessary, and wait for the moment when revealing yourself would matter most. She thought about her students, about the lessons she'd tried to teach them, about resilience and sacrifice, and the difference between perception and reality. Then she opened her secure laptop and typed a response to Christensen. "Mission accepted. Ready to deploy on your order." Some fights required visible warriors, soldiers who stood in formation and faced their enemies directly. But other fights required shadows, people willing to become invisible, to accept humiliation and abuse, to wait in darkness until the moment came to step into light. Irene Hill had learned to fight in shadows. And as long as threats like Fenris existed, she'd continue that fight. The sunrise outside her window painted the world in brilliant colors. Another beautiful morning at a base where everyone knew her name and respected her authority. It was everything Sentinel hadn't been, but part of her already missed the challenge of deep cover. The sharp clarity that came from knowing every moment mattered. Every detail could be the difference between mission success and failure. She closed her laptop and stood, looking at her reflection in the office window. Not the dismissed analyst anymore, but not entirely separate from that role either. The woman who'd been stomped on at formation was still part of her. Scars and all. That woman had learned something important. That strength isn't always visible. That power doesn't always announce itself. And that sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one everyone has dismissed as harmless. Irene smiled at her reflection. Somewhere, another intelligence network was operating, confident in their security, certain that NATO's defenders couldn't touch them. They didn't know that shadows were watching, that someone invisible was already gathering evidence, preparing for the moment when two words would change everything. She'd been VALKYRIE-1 at Sentinel. She'd be someone else at the next assignment, playing a different role, enduring different challenges, but the mission would always be the same. Protect the innocent, stop the threats, and prove that being underestimated was the most powerful advantage an operative could have. The next mission would start soon. Until then, she had students to train, knowledge to pass on, and scars that reminded her why the work mattered. They'd stomped on her hands at formation. They'd dismissed her, humiliated her, tried to break her. But when she'd spoken those two words, VALKYRIE-1, everything changed. And it would change again, wherever the next mission took her. Some soldiers earned respect through visible heroism. Irene Hill earned it by being invisible until the moment invisibility became her weapon. That was the lesson she hoped her students would learn. That was the legacy of VALKYRIE-1. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.